Well, 90% tax rates would do that. I'm glad it's lower now. But what else did you learn that surprised you?
The way that we get ideas for tax reform is from our politicians offering more and more relief. And what people don't realize is that these things have negative consequences. They all add to the complexity of the code. And what we want to try to let people understand is that there are other options out there besides things that add to more and more complexity that we can ask our politicians for.
Options like?
Well, simplifying the code can be done in several ways. And there are ideas to simplify the income tax, or as many economists believe today, going to something like a consumption tax solves a lot of the complexity issues. So we try to bring this debate up and have our experts talk about it in the film, and we're hoping that we can get this discussion started with our film.
And one of those consumption taxes is the fair tax, and we will have an expert talking about that later in this program. You also found that what makes people mad about taxes, and I think of the current Tea Party anger about spending, partially relates to taxes, it's not just the amount, but an unfairness.
Yeah, I think the issue of fairness is, a big part of the tax code. Let's go back to the Tea Party, the actual Boston Tea Party. People always look at that as a revolt against taxes, and, it wasn't really a revolt against taxes. It was against the loopholes in the system.
And your movie was news to me about that. Let's take a look. The exemptions mean some rich people pay less than some poor people, and you make a good point about the unfairness of that and how it was unfairness rather than the amount that sparked the original Boston Tea Party.
The U.S. was born of a tax revolt, but it was actually not a revolt against high taxes. The Boston Tea Party was a revolt against tax loopholes. The British had passed a law that granted certain special favors to a few merchants who were selling tea, and American merchants resented the monopoly that had been granted here and the tax exemptions that had been granted, and their objections to the British tax were really directed at the loopholes that were part of that tax, not at the tax itself. It's important because it is Americans' first experience with really throwing the tea into the harbor, but simply to say, we are not going to stand for this kind of special treatment.
If you think in those times how low taxes were, they were, what, 1 or 2%, and how different that is now. Today's Tea Party movement is about anger at just the size of government.
Right. The level of taxation is certainly a big issue to a lot of people, but another issue is the design of the tax code, and that sometimes gets not as much attention, but it's still a very important aspect when we talk about reform.
The design meaning all the social engineering, all the special rules to try to steer behavior?
That's one part of it. Every exemption, deduction, exclusion comes from the fact that, well, that's partially because we have an income tax and a democracy, and those things are products of that system. And so can you develop a system that doesn't have to deal with those sort of concerns?
Wouldn't it be nice? I mean, this is just so ugly. The only people who understand this are the specialists, and yet there's no movement really to do anything but add more pages, more special deals for this little group.
Right, and there are plenty of people that are getting the tax code to do what they want it to do, special interest groups and what have you. The American people, if they want to get their fair shake in the tax code, they need to pay attention to these issues. They need to be considering this an important thing so that it doesn't just work for the people who have enough lobbyists, let's say.
So you should pay attention. If you got your taxes in by now, you sure you got all the deductions and exemptions you're entitled to? It's hard to keep up. New ones are introduced all the time.
Tax credit of up to $8,000 for first-time home buyers.
Give families a $10,000 tax credit for 4 years of college and increase Pell Grants. A new small business tax credit, expanding the tax credit for those who start a nest egg.
All politicians love tax credit.
A $5,000 tax credit for each and every customer who buys that car.
Jobs creation tax credit. Have a $500 per child tax credit.
I'm proposing tax credits for daycare.
These tax credits do sound good. Sounds like I'm getting free stuff. And we do get free stuff. I got the golf cart because we saw this ad from a dealer which explained that because of a tax credit of $6,000, this golf cart would cost me nothing. So I got this golf cart. The handout expired in December, so sorry, too bad. You can't take advantage of the scam. I mean the Energy Improvement and Extension Act. Thank you, Charlie Rangel, who helped pass it. The politicians advertise these as tax cuts. Mike Huckabee, my colleague, and Newt Gingrich say credits are a good thing because anything that lowers taxes is good. But giving me this tax credit to buy a golf cart I don't need means everyone else in America has to pay more to make up for the $6,000 I got back. Why is that good? It also makes taxes more complex. Here's the line my accountant had to deal with to get the credit. I'm entitled to a credit of $2,500 plus $417 for each kilowatt hour of traction battery capacity and so on. Now, I can see why golf cart makers might like the tax credit. Mike Tomberlin owns Tomberlin Electric Vehicles. So, Mike, your golf carts are sold in 700 dealerships. You must have made out well from this credit.
Well, I think our customers certainly did. They took advantage of it to a large degree.
You sold more cars.
Absolutely, yes. We certainly did. And, you know, but we came out in opposition to it even in November publicly.
Now, that's unusual. I mean, I call this corporate welfare, and very rarely do the recipients of such welfare say, we don't like it.
Well, first, let me tell you, I don't view a tax credit as corporate welfare. I think with AIG and some of the others, I think that's an element of corporate welfare. A tax credit tends to reward those that pay taxes. Fortunately, maybe they can pay less taxes. But the reason we came out in opposition to it in November is it manipulated the market. And we knew that were it to continue in its current form, we would be adding a lot of infrastructure, a lot of staff, and unknowingly or incrementally, we would become thereafter dependent on the continuation of a government subsidy. So we didn't think it was in the best interest of us or the entire industry as it relates to low-speed vehicles.
Did you complain to Representative Rangel and say, we don't want this?
Well, you know, frankly, I didn't know where it came from or how it got here, but we do write an article in some magazines and went public with it, much to the chagrin of some of the industry. But we do think it was the right thing to do.
And the idea behind this silly credit was that electric vehicles are magic. They're going to make us energy independent. Some good scientific research later said these are no more environmentally kind than gasoline-powered vehicles because the electricity often comes from coal, and that's just as environmentally damaging. So, in a way, it's sort of a scam. But the contrast I see is that your company is not very old. You built your company just in maybe a few years ago without subsidies.
Well, you know, I guess it is somewhat of a shame to say that we did it the old-fashioned way when you're only 5 years old. But we did a lot of research and saw that golf carts were being utilized off the golf course. So we engineered a more car-oriented platform for on-road use under the NHTSA various guidelines and wrapped it to look like a golf cart. And, you know, we have a Carroll Shelby edition, a Lily Pulitzer edition. I mean, it's been real successful for us.
You added safety features so you elderly people can drive it on the street in Florida.
That's right.
But now, you could have done that without a subsidy.
Well, we did. We did it without a subsidy, and we would continue to do it without a subsidy. You know, when you talk about corporate welfare, John, I think the last thing we need, we have personal welfare right now that doesn't require work. The last thing we need is corporate welfare that doesn't require performance.
Well, far better than subsidies. So thank you, Mike Tomberlin, for being the rare businessman to say no to corporate welfare.